Some years ago, I wrote a book of stories called Show Your Ink, full of ideas about authenticity, relationships, and decision making. It was mostly about success in leadership and life. That phrase, show your ink, became an amazing example of how something simple and small can end up having a big impact. Thanks to that little phrase and the stories in the book, I've been fortunate to connect with so many people around the world, many of whom have been kind enough to share their personal stories with me that relate to themes in the book. Touching anecdotes about everything from cancer to tattoos, family crises, big life changes, and many personal epiphanies. Looking back at that collection of stories, one in particular speaks to an idea that I really want you to remember so that you can act on it too. Small things you do can have a big impact. The story goes something like this. I was sitting in my office one day when the phone rang. It was the president of a company. His name was Mike. He told me he was calling to discuss some employee issues at his company, which was a quickly growing professional services firm. A few days later, we met at his office. Mike told me he felt the growth they had experienced had strained the employees. He said it didn't feel like a big family anymore. People were complying, but no longer seemed as committed. When he asked for new ideas, he said he was greeted with silence. Since they had grown, people didn't know him personally anymore. And because he had such a big personality, he could tell people weren't comfortable speaking up and being honest with him about things at work. Mike feared that this dynamic was going to make everyone risk-averse and, in fact, might kill any hopes of innovation. I thought about it for a moment. Then, just as a jumping off point for our discussion of culture and engagement and innovation, I asked him to tell me about the types of things he was doing to recognize and reward his employees. Mike rattled off several programs the company had used in prior years. Each basically amounted to handing out trinkets from some sort of corporate catalog. Coffee mugs, t-shirts, stress balls, golf shirts, that sort of thing. Following each effort he described, he would say, well, I think we did that for a few months, but I'm not sure people felt very motivated, so then we tried, and he would share some other example. As he was doing all of this, he seemed to notice I wasn't very impressed. So he smiled and said, okay, those weren't great, but there is one thing we do that everybody loves. I said, wonderful. What is it? Well, he said, every quarter we have a company meeting. I get on stage and I do the big tap dance, an update on revenues, margins, profits, and so on. And when I'm done, I bring up a handful of employees who have been nominated by their peers as the employees of the quarter. I said, nice. I've seen many versions of these ceremonies and they can be quite effective. So, what do you give them? Mike sat back, relishing the moment. He paused, and then like a proud father, he said, I give them a ham. My enthusiasm disappeared, and I suppressed my desire to giggle. I had just met this person, and I was basically being interviewed as a consultant, so I knew it would be rude to laugh. I composed myself and asked, how's that ham thing working for you? He didn't miss a beat. He said, they love it. It's one of the few things around here that everybody really appreciates. I had my doubts. And in the following weeks, I talked to many employees through interviews, focus groups, and informal chats by the water cooler and the picnic tables out back. I inquired about a number of topics, but especially about the ham scheme. So, what do you think I learned? The ham thing was the biggest shared source of ridicule and condemnation in the entire organization. Shared is a big word in my world when you're talking about things such as teams and culture. At this company, the employees didn't always agree about everything, but they sure did agree that the ham award was ridiculous. It had become the symbol for how disconnected management really was. Anytime the employees wanted to make a joke about management, you'd better believe there was a ham involved. The fascinating part was how utterly disconnected the president seemed to be. The ham was a widely embraced joke, and yet Mike thought everyone loved the quarterly ceremony. Soon after I learned the truth about the ham, the next quarterly meeting rolled around. Hundreds of employees filled a large auditorium. I sat off to the side, watching the event unfold. Mike took the stage. Customers, margins, profits. He did a great tap dance. The audience seemed interested and appreciative until the tap dance ended. The president began the recognition ritual by reiterating the importance of hard work and achievement. Almost immediately, I watched the audience become a nonverbal train wreck. Employees stared at their shoes, looked at their watches, rolled their eyes, and shook their heads. Mike was oblivious. Next, he announced the names of that quarter's 3 victims. Polite applause followed, and the 3 winners slowly took the stage. Mike handed each one a ham, smiled, thanked them, shook their hands, and posed with them for a picture. To this day, I don't know where he got the idea that hams would make a great gift. I do know that everyone hated them. The recipients were actually the butt of the joke twice, once on stage receiving the ham, and again when the photograph of them holding the ham appeared in the company newsletter the following month. I watched as the 3 unenthusiastic winners exited the stage. They weren't smiling. The audience was uninterested. I was fascinated. I resolved then and there to learn the fate of those 3 hams. When the meeting was over, I followed those individuals and learned what became of the hams. When I did, I knew I had to do my job, so I walked into the president's office and said, "Mike, I need to tell you something." But before he could speak, I realized what I really wanted to say, and I said, No, I think I need to show you something. Would you mind coming with me for a minute?" He looked puzzled, but he agreed. I took him outside and then around the side to the back of the building, where sat an industrial-sized dumpster. Now, I knew that no words were necessary. I opened the huge top of the dumpster. Inside were 2 of the 3 hams he had handed out. Mike looked astonished, then appalled, then furious. There he stood in a very expensive suit, hands on the rim of this massive dumpster, trying to get a better look inside. I actually thought he was trying to jump in for a minute. Instead, he just turned away slowly and began cussing loudly. It turns out that using expletives is something of an art form, and this man was a true artist. Here's some good advice for coaches listening to this story. You can't coach someone when they're experiencing extreme emotions. You have to allow the emotions to dissipate and then engage the person rationally when they regain a little control. So I waited. A minute or 2 later, Mike stopped to take a breath. He looked at me, exasperated, and said, "Well, what do you think I should do, Doc?" And I did what all great consultants do. I made something up right there on the fly. I said, "Here's what you do. You call a meeting. Let's make it next Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. Tell everyone in the company to meet you in the parking lot in the front of the building. Mandatory attendance, but don't tell them why. Just tell them to be there." Now, when 2 o'clock rolls around next Tuesday and everyone is gathered in the parking lot, I want you to show up on the roof, 3 stories up, looking down at them, and I want you to bring a ham. I told him to give some version of this speech. "Hi, everyone. Can I please have your attention? Look, I found the hams in the trash. I can't believe it took me this long to figure out that you folks don't like the hams. Frankly, I'm a little embarrassed. When I figured this out, I realized that you probably know each other better than I know you, which is why, from now on, I will not be passing out hams. I'm going to put together a cross-functional group, someone from each department, give you guys a little budget, and let you own the process of coming up with the criteria and the awards for the employee recognition program. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. No more hams." Of course, you can't advise a guy to get on a roof and give that speech while holding a ham without also advising him to end the speech by chucking the ham. Now, did you know that when those hams are manufactured, they're injected with a lot of liquids? Just a side note. Anyway, I told him to do this. He didn't immediately agree. So I started a great conversation about the need as a leader to be human, to be real, to laugh at yourself, and to make it okay for others to laugh at you too. Confidence and competence are spectacular, but so is humility and a little self-deprecation. If you want people to embrace tough conversations and all of the risk and learning that comes with innovation, you have to make them comfortable with you. After a small amount of arm twisting, he agreed. The following Tuesday finally arrived. At 1 p.m., I was with Mike in his office working on the speech. He was nervous. I knew this had to work or my tenure as an advisor and coach to this organization would be over. We could hear the employees moving through the office as they began to assemble in the parking lot in front of the building. Minutes later, I stood on the roof behind Mike and out of sight of the employees below. He looked at me with a facial expression that said, "You'd better be right, pal." I smiled and I handed him the ham. He turned around and stepped closer to the edge. The crowd of employees gasped at the sight of their leader standing on the roof of the building. The speech he gave was short, honest, and funny. He delivered his words with sincerity and vigor. He even laughed at himself a little while speaking. It was a spectacular speech from the heart. Now, when I coached him earlier, I suggested it might be fun, if things went well, to end the speech by carefully dropping the ham over the edge of the building. I thought it would be funny and symbolic of the change he was describing. However, when he saw how much the employees loved his speech, he got excited and decided to reach back and throw the ham into the middle of hundreds of employees. I nearly died. I had images of someone getting knocked out, lawsuits, and so on. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. So, how do you think the employees responded to all of this? It was cheers. There was a massive outpouring of shared positive emotion, the likes of which had never been seen before in the history of this company. In an instant, this man, who was at risk for becoming unapproachable at the top of the organization, now seemed real. He was 3 stories removed from them, but for the first time in a while, he didn't feel removed. He had crossed a rare leadership hurdle. He was still clearly the leader, but now he was also a member of the team. Mike raised his hands above his head in victory as the employees laughed right along with him. I finally walked to the edge and looked down at the parking lot. I saw a crowd of people dancing around a messy pile of ham. Everyone was smiling and laughing. Mike looked over at me and we both smiled. At the next quarterly meeting, I once again sat off to the side in that large auditorium. Mike took the stage and began the tap dance. When he finished, he said, "As you know, there will be no hams today." People giggled and a few even applauded. Mike then introduced the team that had been appointed to come up with the awards. Sadly, the new team basically decided to once again hand out trinkets from a corporate catalog. I didn't think it was very motivational at all. I was a little right and a little wrong. As I continued watching, I recognized something. While the crowd might not have been enthralled with the gifts being offered, they didn't have that look of disinterest and outright disgust I'd seen during the ham presentation. I thought about it, and it made complete sense. They now owned the process. Their voices had been heard. Making fun of the trinkets being handed out would be the equivalent of making fun of themselves. After the meeting, I hung out in the cafeteria and out back by the picnic tables. There were no ham jokes as there had been before. Instead, I heard employees talking about how they could maybe tweak the awards process and make it even better next time. I heard people taking ownership. I also heard people making positive comments about the president. In the following days, I also saw several employees speaking to him more openly and comfortably. The scary status he possessed wasn't quite as scary anymore. As the weeks rolled on, it was clear the culture was shifting. People started to talk more openly to him and to each other. The comfort and confidence needed to engage positive change and innovation was clearly building. With one flying ham, Mike had become more approachable and real, a leader, not just a boss. He learned to admit when he was wrong and laugh about it, and everyone loved it. Innovation, change, and culture often sound like huge concepts, but the truth is you can start making real progress in these areas just by doing a few small things. Maybe the best place to start is just being a little more authentic and real, because that usually makes others a little more comfortable doing exactly the same thing, and that's when rapport happens, and then new, interesting conversations begin.